guest today, Susan Harrow. Susan is a media coach and publicity expert with an impressive 32 years of experience in the field. She runs a successful coaching and marketing agency called Harrow Communications Inc. and has helped countless entrepreneurs and business leaders clarify their messages and get life-changing media exposures. Susan is also a regular contributor to the Huffington Post and Psychology Today and has a particular focus on helping women entrepreneurs promote themselves and their businesses with authenticity. In recent years, she's been using her media philosophy to help founders in Silicon Valley perfect their investor pitches and raise from C to Series C. She has actually authored this incredible book that you can find it online on Amazon as well as on prsecrets.com. You can definitely check that out. Sell Yourself Without Selling Your Soul by Susan Harrow. And we're honored to have her here with us on This Week with Sabir. So let's give a warm welcome to Susan Harrow. Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I work with men entrepreneurs too. When I said women entrepreneurs, I go, I have a lot of men as well. So it's the whole gamut. Yeah.
So I've been part of many pitches, right? On the receiving end of it, on the giving end of it. So what are the most essential elements that go into a killer pitch for media and investors?
Well, even before the pitch, I really think that the most important thing is your presence. Camus said, we are the sum of all of our experience. We're also the sum of all of our thoughts. So really what investors are looking for, what the media is looking for, is you with all of your quirks, who you are. And part of who you are needs to be relaxed. And that might sound like an oxymoron, because I think we all get really nervous when there's like the cameras are showing, or when we've got a countdown like this and it's like ready, you're on. And certain things, when we're nervous, different things happen when we're under pressure. So one of the things that we must do is practice role play in the mediums that we're going to be in. Like this is with a webcam. When you're in studio, you want to practice with the cameras and the hot lights so you get that feel. So a lot of my clients, when they fly to San Francisco, we go into the same studio that PBS and CNN uses so they can experience what it feels like to have a cameraman, to have satellite, to be surrounded by, a green screen, and just that whole experience. And then when we do Zoom, we want the experience here of, this experience too. And then each medium has its own experience too. So podcast is different than print, is different than TV. So we need to then, and it's totally different than pitching an investor, right? Where it's either in person or on Zoom. So there's a mastery of not just the technical aspects of it, but the mastery of self in each of those mediums, and knowing how to use the languaging and the time that you have effectively in all of those mediums. And then do you want me to? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
You used a lot of technical words, And by the way, I have an engineering background, and I could tell you when conversation is technical, there were a lot of technical jargon. But the good thing is we have 60 minutes together. We will unpack some of those things, right? And I'm going to ask you more deeper questions there. So how can entrepreneurs clearly communicate the unique value they offer, and stand out from the competition?
So they really want to have really want to have a messaging strategy. And that is based on what your big vision is. Number one is, what's your big vision? How do you want to serve? Number two, what do you want for yourself? And that's professionally, personally, physically, financially, spiritually, emotionally, because it can open up the whole world to you. And that means, like one of my clients, for example, she has a number of PR firms booking her. She went to a charity event with celebrities and got to meet and work with, have the opportunity to meet all of these different celebrities on that level. She's now on the cover of a major magazine, right? So there's all different kinds of opportunities. We hadn't even thought about that for her, like being on a cover of a magazine. And in terms of our PR, we usually think about being interviewed in a magazine or being on TV, right? So we're really thinking about all of the different things that you want. Do you want money for your cause? Do you want to get funded? And then the messaging strategy comes from the kind of results that you want for your business and what kind of people, what kind of clients and customers or donors, whatever that is, or funders. We want to look to see, make sure that that messaging is landing with those particular, if you've got different verticals, for example.
Yeah, I mean,
I hope I didn't use
whenever
any jargon there.
because the thing is, you don't know the audience member if they how much they understand PR terms and media terms and other types of things like that. That's why that's what I mean by technical jargon. That it might be very specific to some people, and we may need to unpack it a little bit.
Okay.
Whenever you pursue anything, there are always, like, you have your wins, but you have your, what I don't want to call it failures. You have your learnings, right? You have your learnings.
Yeah,
So
so they can be spectacular failure, but quote unquote, they can be spectacular learnings or challenges for sure.
By the way, I've seen entrepreneurs that have had disastrous failures, right? And then when they came back, they were tenfold much richer than they were from that failure, because the learning was so rich, from it. So given that, like, what pitfalls should entrepreneurs avoid when pitching to media and investors? Is it maybe you're too early, or and you're not ready yet, or you don't have enough training? What is it from your perspective?
Well, the number one thing that I find for both media and pitching investors is people think that they can wing it. So they do not have a very tight, prescribed and practiced appearance, right? Like, so you can't wing it in that sort. You really have to have your presence down. You have to have practice it. You need to have your statistics down. It needs to be very well rehearsed. So then you can go off script if you need to. That's number one. But really what investors are looking for is your presence, your leadership quality, more than anything. Can you lead this company? Of course, all of the other things have to be, you have to prove market value. You have to show that this is a viable idea, of course. And you have to speak in their language. Like, I had one investor, and she was talking about, she was doing manufacturing for small makeup brands, and she was talking about Rihanna, and she was talking about other people. And I said, you know what? Most of your investors who you're pitching to are men over 50 or 60. They might not even know who Rihanna is. And we don't want to make them seem stupid. So we want to show that she's got a very successful makeup brand and why. And so some of that is where we assume that our audiences know the same things that we do. We really have to make that bridge from what we know to the unknown and to the known, and to make people comfortable with that. And that needs to be all 100% clarified too. So we really need to understand our audience. If she were pitching to women investors who, were in that same industry, she might not have to explain who Rihanna and how important it is to have makeup in all of those different shades for all different genders and the variety of ethnicities, right? That she made popular. And then the other thing that I want to say is, the other thing that you need to know is that you want to be prepared to be shot down, because you really want to know, like, all of the worst case scenarios, the worst case kind of questions that you would be asked, so you can handle those. And you want to practice that. You want to practice personalities that trigger you. You want to practice the questions that trigger you, and get into a conversation and really know what it feels like when that happens, when somebody asks you a super direct question, or perhaps a derogatory question. Certainly for women, we often get derogatory or insulting kinds of questions. Men get different questions. Men might get more aggressive or more questions that have to do with growth and scaling. And so we need to be prepared for all of those. And then the last thing is that we want to be able to, I know this might sound really, like a no-brainer, but we have to ask for the sale. I've heard people pitches, and I'm like, well, where's your ask? And you have a time frame for your ask. We have to have, there has to be the ask. And I actually did this for DECA, the kids who who I love, the kid entrepreneurs. And I did
Mhm.
they had one of those event contests. And I was like, but they didn't ask for the sale at the end. I'm like, well, wait a minute, you got to ask for the money.
Yeah, don't assume that because you're pitching to them that it means that you're asking also. You might be just telling them about your business. That's it, you know?
Yeah. You have to ask for the
Yeah,
sale and be really clear about it. Yeah.
very clear. Okay. I mean, actually, one thing that I learned in that is that don't assume anything about your audience. You can take certain assumptions, but because the thing is, I could have a panel of 5 investors, and 3 of them are men and 2 are women, or something like that. Now I have a mixed audience, and different age groups and different ethnicities. So you have to level the playing field. Like, let's say if you're pitching a biotech company, how many of those investors would understand biotech companies and what you're trying to solve? Maybe it's not related to music and fashion and the obvious things, everyday things that everybody uses. So don't make that assumption. You have to lay some groundwork about what it is, quickly, as quickly as you can. In the Rihanna example, maybe lead with the products and the cosmetics that you're trying to pitch, and then say that then you use Rihanna as a reference point in that scenario. Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
Yeah, and the other thing is that what you said was like super relevant. We actually need to know as much as we can about the people who are in the room. That goes for media. Like even if you're doing a podcast, you want to listen to all the podcast. You want to listen to podcasts. You want to see how it's positioned on Apple. You want to go to the person's website. And if you have investors in the room and you know who those people are, you read all of the background about them so you can personalize your comments and your presentation to different people in the room, to make it personal and touch each person with what's important to them.
So I'm an avid watcher of Shark Tank. I've worked with the sharks on Shark Tank. That's kind of
Yeah,
my world, right? To
yeah,
me,
that's
I
interesting.
don't watch NFL. I watch Shark Tank. To me, that's
Yeah,
a touch
my
sport.
mom loves it too. My mom loves Shark Tank. Yeah, she's she's a real
So
estate shark. Yeah, my mom. Yeah,
out of the 5 sharks on the Shark Tank, every shark has some sort of an objection. They have some
yeah,
sort of a doubt, right? Mark Cuban always hates like a vitamins and supplements company. Always, that's his the thing. Kevin O'Leary loves to think about how he can license it and turn it into a licensed product. Maybe he can finance it and then get payback over time. So he's lending his money out. Everybody has their own style, right? So for entrepreneurs on the other side of the equation, when they're on the other side of the sharks, in the Shark Tank, how can entrepreneurs address any doubts or objections from media or investors that might come up?
that's where we look at the worst case scenarios. What don't you want to be asked? What you think you're going to be asked? What's going on in the culture today? We want to look at the whole big picture and make sure that you can navigate from what those questions and that you can transition to the information that you want the audience to know, no matter what. So it's a little bit different in a media situation than it is in a Shark Tank situation, because Shark Tank, you want to think about like all of your different weaknesses or where there are gaps in the market and things that you don't know. But you do need to know as much as possible. But also, you want to be prepared on Shark Tank. I've definitely seen them like knock your personality. So if you are sensitive about your personality, you want to make sure that you are ready for those kind of comments, like somebody saying like you're just a showman or you're just a bullshitter, and I don't really think that you can do what you're saying that you're doing. So you want to have practiced in role play, actually going through those kind of things that really get you in the gut, so you can handle them with grace and equanimity no matter what. And that means like what happens when you like this, and then you need to be able to take a breath and center yourself. And I've definitely seen people recover super quickly on Shark Tank and in the media, right, too, where there's that moment of freeze, but then they transition to the answers that they want the audience to know. But that takes quite a lot of practice and repetition. And so that's what people don't know. What people who what the people that I worry about are the people who are not afraid to do media or not afraid to go on Shark Tank. Those are the people that I am afraid for because they don't know what they're in for, because it's a highly pressurized situation where anything can happen and it can go in any kind of direction. And that's why we practice all of those different ways.
So one of the things I do whenever I'm working with my clients in e-commerce, right? And I work with a lot of founders, a lot of founders. I do work with big brands that don't have founders anymore. They have VP and SVP of marketing, but a lot of the other brands that I work with, there are founders. Uh, how is using, I mean, I highly recommend, even in social media, for those founders to actually tell their story when they're trying to sell their product or service. It's really important because if you think about Johnson and Johnson or Pepsi or Coke or any of these other brands, who's the founder? There's no founder there. It's whatever ad you have, like a white bear drinking Coca-Cola. That's their brand. That's the icon for it. But as a human being, if you're behind a brand that you want to get behind it, you have to tell your story. So from your perspective, how important is that personal story to the pitch process, to make it a memorable pitch that, oh, that's the person with XYZ story, not just their product or service that they're pitching.
I think it's super important. I think it's super important to lead with that story pretty much almost all the time, to lead with your founder story, to lead with your personal story, because when we tell stories, our brains sync up neurologically. Neuroscience says our brains sync up. So everyone in the room, whether they want to or not, is syncing their brain with your story. So I think that even though it's also an intellectual choice, if an investor chooses to invest in you or an audience that you're connecting with on the media, it's really at the emotional level. It's at the more primal level. So telling those kind of stories is super, super important. And, it's really of the essence. And that's why I know we're going to put this into the notes, but one of the creations that I've done for everyone is to create your signature story. And there's 5 major templates. Of course, there are more, but there's 5 major ones that I've isolated and sort of reverse engineered that someone can tell for their signature story. Because the first question you're going to be asked on the media is, why do you do what you do? An investor's going to say, why are you creating this product? Why should you be the one to lead the company? And that's what the story should tell. So I created these 5 templates that you can do in 5 minutes. You choose one of them and you do, and it's at prsecrets.com/SIGPOD, SIGPOD, like signature story podcast, because that is so, so, so important. So if anybody doesn't have their signature story down and you even want to do a podcast, you need to have that story.
Yeah. I mean, as an example, with my daughter, I watch every beginning of every summer, America's Got Talent is always on TV, right? At the start of summer. I always watch it with her. That's one of the things I do with my daughter. And whenever they bring in a dance group that came from overseas, from Bangladesh or South Africa or something like that, before they get on stage, the first thing they do, what is their story? Why are they here, right? And they talk about their upbringing, their challenges, all of that stuff. Or even a person, when they come up to the microphone, tell us who you are. And then the first sentence out of their mouth is their personal story that makes it memorable, right? And then sometimes even the judges start tearing up and they are waiting to hear what talent that this person has and stuff like that. I think even though it's not Shark Tank, but I think it's there are shows like that I think entrepreneurs can learn from to see how to also like tell a story about themselves, and that's a very emotional platform to learn
That's
from,
exactly
in my opinion.
And maybe I should share one of my signature stories at this point, if it's a good point,
Sounds
because
great. Let's go for it.
what I do, and you don't just need one, by the way, because you can have different signature stories for different audiences. So I was in junior high, and I was friends with, I was both an athlete, I was friends with the artists, and I was friends with the popular group. So I was actually in 3 different groups because I was a jock, I was with the popular kids, and I'm also really artistic. And one of my artistic friends was being pummeled and beat up by somebody on the playground. And there was a big crowd gathered around him. And I saw my friend down there, and I went and grabbed the bully and yanked him off and started yelling at him and yelling at the crowd and saying, "What are you people all looking at? And, get away and just get out of here. And you, as the bully, stop doing that and never do that again." And today, and that was one of my friends who was an artist, because he didn't necessarily have a voice. So what I see my role as today is giving voice to those who maybe don't have a voice, but the people who are the crazies, the innovators, the people who maybe were the nerd kids, in high school, maybe not the popular kids. And you can relate to that. And look at how popular you are now, right? Like the
Total,
people
total nerd, by
total
the way,
nerd, you're a total nerd. But the people who have something really to give, it's also introverts as well. So sometimes it's introverts who say, should I be stepping forward in the spotlight? And I say yes, because they're often more thoughtful. And by the way, they often do better in pitch meetings to investors, because Adam Grant did some research on this that showed that people who were like overly passionate and overly excited about their ideas weren't taken as seriously. So it's not true that the extroverts do as well necessarily as the introverts, who are taken more seriously and their ideas accepted more readily with investors. But today, so I work with those people who really want to get their goodness and their greatness and whatever their offer is out there, and need some help in the positioning and the packaging and the actual moving it out into the public venue, and really being able to shape that kind of content. I just had a woman come to me, by the way, who's going to become a client, and she was fantastic on TV. And I was saying, I'm not really sure that you need me. And she said, "Oh no, I need you. I really need to get my messages honed in," because she was very spontaneous on TV. But is she getting the results that she wants? Is she, on every TV appearance, really moving her business and brand forward? And she wanted to be more intentional about that, about like really crafting the kind of messaging, content management that was going to connect with her audience for the next level, because she really wanted the word to be spread out to this new venture and this new book that she has. And being very, I think the word would be intentional is the best word for it, to be very intentional, and then to carry that out through every single media appearance that you have.
So you mentioned 2 things there, introverts and extroverts, right? One thing that came to my mind is I saw a book by this title later on. I think I may have read the book. Fast is slow and slow is fast, right? To
Yes,
me,
yes.
so the question I want to ask you related to introverts, introverts have their challenges with pitches, right? And presentations.
Yeah.
Extroverts also have their challenges, right?
Yes.
Let me explain. Like the introvert may want to, if it's a 30-minute meeting, they may want to stay quiet for 15 minutes or 20 minutes and maybe talk really meaningful and in depth for 5 minutes, but it will be packed, right? It would unpack like a bomb, basically. Versus an extrovert, they may not allow the person to even get a word in, and they
Right.
keep on blasting whatever their opinions are, whatever they think the other person. Both of them are on 2 extremes. So how do you bring those folks, like with very different personalities, to be more, I guess, engaging, right? Engaging, and make sure that they're still hitting those points, but they are delivering the value in that meeting. To whether it's media. I mean, media is very challenging, but let's say if it's an investor meeting, right? How do you bring them more to the middle ground for both of those? Because both of those are 2 extremes,
It's really a balance, and part of that is a lot of practice and role play, which is what we do quite a lot in terms of iteration. But since I've worked with both introverts and extroverts probably equally, for the introvert, it's about really feeling the confidence to express what they have. And then for both of them, it's the back and forth. It's the reading the people and reading a conversation. And like I was media training someone at a very large corporation, and I saw one of his media appearances. He got all of his points out. It was really great. He had no rapport with the host. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Like he hit all of his points, but he didn't interact with the host. And what we want to see is the combination of interaction and delivery. And that part of that is quite a lot of practice, because you need to give time for the person to respond. And it's different in a media appearance than it is with investors, and how you want to handle that. Like some people might want, like as an introvert, maybe wants feedback all the way along, not at the end. You know, at any point, if you feel comfortable with that, interrupt me if something's not clear, or if you have a question. And some people get really derailed by that. They're like, I need to finish the whole thing. And then, but we want to practice so you can do both. In a media interview, you have to get your points out, but you need to listen. And at least, even if you're transitioning to a point that you really want to make that the host hasn't asked you, you have to make the bridge natural and sound like it's part of the conversation. You can't just ignore the question and jump onto whatever it is and sacrifice the rapport and the relationship for getting your message out. So I think they're both really equally important, particularly because the relationship factor with media is the audience follows the host's lead. So if the host isn't relating to you and loving you, they're not either. So it doesn't matter if you blast your points out there. It's really creating that delicious rapport and being able to play and being able to riff, even though, I mean, of course, I want you to have all of your points down and I want you to be able to deliver them, but I want you to be able to riff. And if you don't get your point in and you riff instead and create this marvelous feeling, that's better.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, otherwise, I think it sounds very robotic, or maybe too coached, too practiced,
Yes.
and too much like a teleprompter, that you're reading a teleprompter.
That's exactly right. It's
Not,
much
not,
better
not,
to be
you don't,
natural. It's better to be natural and spontaneous than to be, I never recommend that people read, like even you can see lots of times people's eyes moving, even if they're just doing a video and they're reading. So they're not connecting with the audience. So they might get the words down perfect, but we don't have the feel. And we really want the feel of you. That's the most important thing, is the feel.
Can you share 2 examples, right, where one pitch was knocked out of the park, grand slam, right? And you went like, oh my God, that was brilliant, versus, oh my God, which I'm sure there is plenty of, it fell flat, it failed, it just didn't work, do you have 2 examples that we can share with the audience?
Yes, but I want to make sure to protect the identity of the person.
Yeah, I mean, confidentiality is important. Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for the not good one. So let me say, and it's not necessarily the pitch, it was more the appearance. So I have 2 doctors, both highly accomplished, and one doctor, though he had his points down very well and had done some extraordinary things in his field, which I'm not at liberty to say because then he would be identified, but has done some extraordinary research and has some extraordinary success in his audience. Had some really, the way that he appeared on camera was very stiff and actually kind of a little weird. And he had some quirks as well. So we really want to look at, he was like cocking his head to the side and doing this weird thing when he was under pressure. So we wanted to make sure that his head, staying still on TV is really important. You can still use your hands, but not a lot of head movement because it's super distracting. So I noticed that when he was on a particular show, they did a lot more B-roll. They had a lot less of him on camera. And it was very hard then to get him booked on subsequent shows because he was so awkward and odd, even though the content was like super important. So that's one thing. So we think like, somebody can be really famous and well known, but not if they're well schooled and can feel comfortable in their own skin. My other doctor, who's the telehealth evangelist, is so comfortable on camera and so very both girlfriendy, boyfriendy, like really relates to people and is super relatable that she can pretty much say anything. Does she have her facts down? Of course. Is she super informative? Of course. And because of that, she is now considered an influencer in social media, and her PR firms are booking her like crazy all over, in so many different venues. And then when she gets on a show, like when she was on one TV show and the host had a podcast, she was then invited on the podcast. So then when you're good and good in the sense that you're a great media guest that gives value and that the audience can really relate to, then that automatically starts to create more media naturally, even if you don't have a PR firm or marketing department booking you. Like even if you have somebody, if you're doing it yourself, or you have an assistant doing it too, some of those things happen more organically, right? Because of your personality and because of your ease with yourself and your material.
Now, I'll just go back to Shark Tank, America's Got Talent. Everybody has an opinion, and the judges give you their opinion of what they saw.
Yeah.
Whether it was a pitch or a performance, doesn't matter. It's the same thing. What do you recommend, or what's your advice for handling tough criticism or questions that follow up right after either you're doing it in an investor situation, it would be during your presentation, maybe they're stopping you and asking tough questions or criticizing you, or you're doing your media thing and then you get criticized. In that example of the doctor with a bobbing head, may have been criticized because social media may take that clip and turn it into a meme. So that becomes a very,
oh my God,
very.
thank God that didn't happen. But you're right. It can be turned into a meme.
That's another
And
type of criticism,
That's absolutely a type of criticism. And like a friend of mine who's so delightful, who creates her own words. We were just talking yesterday and she was just sharing, she got a comment from somebody. I don't feel the need to add an extra L on all words like wonderful, like you do, and she's like, it's like this crazy kind of criticism that comes at us. So I think that I want to look at criticism in kind of a bigger way, because criticism is like, we really need to know who we are, what we stand for, and what's important to us, and not listen to naysayers or people who are just criticizing us for the sake of criticism. So that's something different than the media criticizing you or you being in a pitch. So when you're in a tough media interview or you're in a crisis communication situations, that's really different. So those answers really need to have been practiced. We've talked about practice before, Sabir, but it's really super important to get the actual experience of the worst case scenarios and to find out where your triggers are, so you're not triggered in front of a million people. You're triggered in front of me, and I play the hard role of triggering you until, and there's we do some cognitive behavioral activity that's proven, it's neuroscience proven, that when you become inured, if someone does something enough times, it doesn't have the same kind of impact. Whereas the first time somebody criticizes you, it can be like a stab to the heart.
It hits you.
And then the subsequent times, it gets less hard. And then we want to find all those stuck points and all those triggers so we know what they are. Now, we're not going to be able to find all of them because we're all complex beings, but we want to find the major ones because we want to really get at those and practice those and make sure that you can transition from them. So for example, one of my clients was talking about a very difficult situation of having been raped by a very prominent sports figure. And when we were first during the interviews, she actually was transported back and was like reliving the experience. Well, we absolutely don't want that. We want her to be able to talk about the experience, not relive it on camera, but be able to express how important it is to prevent this situation from happening in the future. And that's the point that we needed to transition to how this could be prevented ahead of time and how it can be prevented in the moment, and then what to do afterward if it does happen in an arena where somebody's like super influential. right? So that's why those things need to be practiced, because we don't always know what the visceral experience is going to actually be like. And so finding those trigger points, find the questions you don't want to be asked, and then being able to use like a simple phrase. This one will save your skin in almost every situation, is I don't know about that, and what I do know is. So you can just, and then you just immediately go to the information that you want the audience to know. And what the host really wants and what the show really wants is a great show. So they don't really care that you're not going to answer the question unless it is a crisis communication situation or something where you have done something that you really need to account for. And then that needs to be crafted very well. And the feeling needs to match the apology. That's like super important, because we've all had experiences with like people on the phone, customer service, where they go, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry, sir. And they don't feel sorry. And we're still mad, right? We need them to feel sorry, that I'm so sorry that that happened. It's not just about the words. It's about the feeling tone of the words and the person.
Yeah, sometimes I think I've worked with a lot of customer service organizations. It's very similar, right? You have to you have to be authentic about the concern of the person. I mean, if it's a legitimate concern, like if somebody's daughter was getting married and she really needed that dress to arrive on Thursday because Saturday was the thing and she needed to get fitting, there's no going back from that. I mean, that's, you really need to own it, as a company. In the past 6 months, by the way, you mentioned something that came to my mind, like a crisis situation. Every year, every company goes through it. And in the last 6 months, I believe, a startup that does food delivery, right? I don't want to name the company. They actually had some sort of contamination or something like that with their food, and people did get sick from it. But they did not get ahead of it. So my question is not to blame them for anything. I mean, every company is different. From your perspective, what's your advice for, especially for startups and entrepreneurs, where, because as entrepreneur, I can tell you, you're trying to solve a billion different questions, right? And everything from meeting the payroll to solving the thing you're trying to solve, the product that you're making. On top of it, you're barely learning about PR, right? So what's your advice on, as your company is growing, when is the right time, do you believe, that you should have that spokesperson or your VP of marketing or your CEO, whoever is going to be the face of that company? When is the right time, do you think, is for them to get coached and to get someone like you to coach them and train them?
In the very beginning, like if you listen to Guy Raz, and for the crisis communication, you always want to be first. You want to shape the story. So you want to be the one who's getting out there and talking and apologizing and telling how sorry you are. You want to be able to compensate if there's compensation. You want to be able to do whatever you can do to resolve the problem, right? Immediately, and do it with sincerity and speed. That's what I would say, sincerity and speed. And then for young firms, anyone who's a founder, the time is now. As soon as you can deliver information, like I was talking to one firm, and she had 2 levels. She was already speaking at places like Davos, but her product wasn't going to be able to come to market for another year. So there was a twofold process. The first process is branding her thought leadership. And then the second process would be when the product comes out, to brand the product. And then those 2 things link. So if you are wanting to be a thought leader, even before your product is out there can still be a whole PR campaign shaped as your product is coming to market, and then to be ready when that product is coming to market. So many people that I heard on Guy Raz's show, right? How I Built This, what created that business and what had that business take off, it was PR. If for like 90% of them, they'll talk about, our business didn't take off until we got this amazing opportunities. Sometimes it happened by, quote, a happy accident. Sometimes it was more planned, or it was they started to reach out in a small way. But each of those companies that have then grown to be national brands have all done PR. And so if you want your company to be not just a business, but a brand, PR is essential to weave in at the very beginning and begin to shape the story of your company, the story of your product or your service, and your thought leadership all at the same time, because that's a development process. It's not something that happens in a couple months. I mean, thought leadership develops over months and years, and so does PR and capitalizing on PR. But it can be like, if it is a product or something, like I've talked to clients who they get it into one Whole Foods, and then they can use that as a jumping off point, right, to get into their product, to get into other Whole Foods, or the clients that I've had in O Magazine, right? The people that I've interviewed to get into O Magazine, which is a course that I have that no one else has. And it was the get on, I first had get onto Oprah's show when it was live, and now it's to get into O Magazine. That typically can triple your sales overnight, and they stay there, and they stay at tripled, and then they increase. So it's a very powerful influence. So you want to look at what are the powerful influences for your industry. O Magazine isn't for everyone, but for right now, for people of color, and for all kinds of, because this is the time right now in this moment. If you are a person of color, it's an opportunity that hasn't come up before in our culture today. We don't know how long it's going to last. So this is a really great time to get into places like O Magazine, but also to really be thinking about, where are your people? Where are the people that you want to sell? I mean, O Magazine might not be right for you. It might be a trade magazine, or it might be a podcast, or whatever, to be able to reach your audience. But whatever that is, I would start now to start developing that thought leadership and that product positioning, or that course positioning, or that you positioning.
Yeah. So in any pitch, right, there's always the question of, let me use an example. Like, let's say I come up with a smart exercising bike that's amazing. It comes with a AR, VR headset. I mean, ridiculous, right? I'm pitching it through media. I'm pitching it to investors. The one question that'll always come up: how is this different than Peloton? Insert the name of a competition, right? Whatever. I'm using Peloton as an example here. I don't own a Peloton, but let's say that's what comes up.
Me neither.
Last time I exercised was when I was 18, so that's okay. I said that to someone today.
No way.
I do healthy things, but I'm not.
I'm just looking
going
on
to the gym to.
I met this fabulous gal on the plane, and I just wanted to look at Supernatural when you were talking about it's a new VR virtual reality thing called Supernatural. I was sitting next to her on the plane, and we became fast friends. And she had this is what she's like, the community. She's got a position there in terms of organizing the community for Supernatural. Just made me think of that. I'm like, you can meet people. What I love about this too is you can meet people anywhere, and you can start your publicity at any time. One of my course participants, my workshop participants, met people in the line in the line at Starbucks, sold books out of the trunks of her car, got a speaking engagement. You can meet people and do PR wherever you are. Just start to talk to people and engage with them and find something in common. So Kate and I just really liked each other quite a lot. And it turns out that she and her wife live in the same area as my BFF and his husband in LA. And we're all going to get together when I'm in LA next. And she introduced me to this great exercise program called Supernatural, right? Like, so that's not necessarily, I didn't meet her as in terms of PR, but one of the things that I did is I connected her to I have a doctor who's one of my clients who does integrative. She's an MD, but she does integrative physicianship. And I connected her to the place where they just opened here in Mill Valley, because they've got some really great anti-aging hacks. And so I connected them. So that's like sort of internal PR, right? Of people doing great things together. So there's all kinds of levels, I think, of PR and connection, and you never know where those can lead.
Yeah, that's a fabulous story. The question I was asking earlier about the competition, right? When one of the things that I've been trained over, not PR trained, I'm talking about just in business, is I will talk about the company I'm working on, right? If I'm pitching, and I'm going to talk about the pros of why we succeed, and not necessarily name my competition, right? I've just this is something I've been doing professionally for many years, right? Unless I'm doing a research work for a client, like an audit, a deep audit, where I'm doing competitive analysis, then I'm going to name every single competitor in that, and what their pros and cons are, and everything, very detailed, extremely detailed. But when a question like that comes up, typically it's combined with something like Peloton has $2 billion market cap or market share, what insert market size, right? Of the total size of the market being 5 billion. So they own like 40% of the market, right? And you don't have any budget. You're a startup. How are you going to just bridge that gap for me? You typically are hit with a question like that from investors, especially, or even media might ask you, like, why are you so different than Peloton, right? Or Simple Natural, for example, right? How are you different than insert any other program out there? So how do you address that? How do you address the competition, and especially the market size? Because the other side of the flip of that coin is, typically entrepreneurs are overly optimistic. That means they lie, right? They say, if we even get 10% of that market, our company will be a $500 million company. They have not sold a single VR optimized smart bike thing that they came up with, not one even, and they're talking about $500 million opportunity. So how do you manage that, the competition conversation and market size?
Well, that at that point, they wouldn't be ready for PR, because you have to have sold something. You have to have a somewhat of a track record, so that's number one. And if you don't have a track record, it's a really different type of company than if you do have a track record and to be able to predict it out. If you have not sold one VR bike, it's very hard to get capital, I think, because you don't have proof. You don't have proof of concept. So that's a very different kind of position. So you do want to be ready to know, even if it's a book, in the competitive book arena, we want to know what other books are like yours and why your book is different and what gap do you fill. So I think it's the same thing in any marketplace. It's how are you successful like the competition? So you put the positive spin on that. You don't never diss your competition. You're like, we're going to be successful because we're doing it the same way that they are. And the tweak that we have is to do it this way. And this is how it's been working. And then you need to actually have concrete proof of customer satisfaction or the way that this is being successful. So I think that in any situation, you do need to have that, not just proof of concept, but proof of, real usability or in the real world in order to go to the next step. Certainly for PR. I mean, a lot of people come to me and they call themselves experts or whatever, but they don't have a sphere of influence. If you are calling yourself an expert, it means that, and it's measured in different ways. It could be measured in social media following, but it's not just the following, it's the engagement. So when we're looking at those kinds of things, somebody had just come to me recently. She had a huge social media following, but no engagement. And when I said to a PR firm, I said, I don't feel like I can take her on, that she's not right for me. Just because I just felt like there was a lot of things in the back end that weren't going to work in terms of her presentation. And I said to a PR firm, what do you think? And he's like, she doesn't have any social media engagement, and I just don't think the media is going to buy it. So it didn't matter that she was successful in her business. There has to be a connection between what the media needs now and what's going on in the culture with your expertise and with your topic and with your audience. With her, it didn't connect. So she had a very successful business, multi-million-dollar business, but that wasn't the issue. We both decided it's not media worthy. And so it doesn't mean that your business can't be successful, but if it's media worthy, it needs to be of value to the audience and that people are responding back, that you have a call and response with the audience that you are targeting in whatever realm that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if let's say it is media worthy, right? That's the other side of that coin is how effective is your storytelling, right? Are you
Hmm.
engaging? You know, and from your perspective, how can you hone in on your pitch to make it more engaging, more persuasive, so that I mean, I'm talking about the first 30 seconds of Shark Tank when somebody comes into the tank and they say sharks, blah 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 blah, and some of them are amazing, while other ones are they just fall flat, you know? So how can you make that engaging that people go like, "Oh my God, I want to know more. Tell me more," you know?
It's got to be the hot hook. So the hot hook has to come first in any situation. So the hot hook is what you use in your subject line. In an email, the hot hook would be the first thing you say out of Shark Tank. And that has to be super crystal clear in order to engage the audience and engage Shark Tank instantly. So that's you've got to have it can be a shocking statement, it can be surprising, it can be funny, it can be scary, so it can be any of those type of things, right? Like it doesn't really matter, but it's got to have that emotional zing. I think that's the most important thing, the emotional zing that it has, right? And then you go on to the more logical aspects. It's the same thing with the book title. The book title has to capture our attention instantly, and then the subhead can talk about what it is. So those are the things. And then you ask, well, how can someone do that? Well, that's the practice. I did have a client and she had all kinds of awards, and she had a business that had not only awards, but she had, she couldn't even take on any more clients. She was trying to expand, and she was going more. We were establishing more of a virtual presence in certain areas. She was the most boring storyteller. I was just like, and I'm like, she's got this fantastic product, but she is a snooze. I never underestimate the capability and the capacity of people's of what is possible for anyone, because you never know what the progress is. And I was working with her. She had great testimonials from her clients. I mean, they were amazing but boringly told. And so we worked on pacing, pitch, pausing, voice, tone, speed, staccato, legato, all of the kinds of things that make an interesting presentation. And within 3 months, she became an incredible storyteller that was absolutely riveting. So I just want to say, I think it is possible for people, even the snooze-worthy people. We don't know that they can become unsnoozy. I had another client at a major corporation who was very, tech, let's just say more tech oriented. And one of the things that we worked on with him, and he was at the highest level of leadership, he couldn't go any further, but his company hired me because they said we needed to up his presentation skills. And one of the things that we worked on was, and this was hidden, like I started to uncover all of these amazing stories, the amazing story of his history with the company, the amazing story of how he came to be, these amazing stories with his children that we could relate to the data, that we could relate to, and we interwove those stories with all of the statistics and the hard numbers that he had to present. And then we also did it for 3 different audiences, because he would have a presentation to almost 1,000 people, but they were 3 different audiences. So we needed to have information that would keep everyone engaged at the same time. And that's through the storytelling, while still delivering the core of what he needed to deliver in those presentations and keep people's attention, sometimes for 3 hours at a time. I mean, that's really long. But it was through these engaging stories that captured people and that elevated his presence and his capacity within the company, and started to open up other opportunities, even if it were a lateral move within the company because he couldn't go any higher, right? It's like, oh, people saw other qualities in him and his presence that they saw that he had, that they could use for the good of the company.
So Susan, I always ask all my guests this number one question that I ask. This one of my last questions I asked on the show is, what is, Susan, so what is your number one $100,000 expert insight for entrepreneurs, right? To deliver a confident and compelling pitch to media and investors using public speaking and presentation skills. Yeah, take it away.
Oh my God, talk about pressure. It's like, well, you're putting a zinger at the end, right? Like, oh, Susan, by the way, I didn't tell you I was going to do a zinger at the end. So the question is, what's the number one thing that somebody can do to up their
you
presentation?
dropped a tremendous amount of knowledge, and I really appreciate all of it. I think the audience is going to learn a lot. But what's your number one advice, the $100,000 advice that your expert insight into, because you've been doing this for 32 years now, right?
33, actually. I know we were talking.
Congratulations.
I'm 33. Yeah. So the most important thing is internal practices, because those are what shine outwardly. Like we've been talking a lot about creating storytelling and talking about that, but we haven't talked about the internal practices like that we do. I'm a black belt in Aikido, the kinds of things that we do on the mat, like something as simple as centering. Take a breath, ground yourself, feel your feet on the ground, bring yourself back to center. One of the most important things is to come back to center. Not that we're not thrown off center, because we are. And it doesn't matter. Even the founder of Aikido said, they said, how do you always stay in center? He said, I don't. I'm knocked off center, but I get back so quickly you don't see it. And when you start to train yourself, train your brain, train your mind to come back to center, to take the breath, to not let those trigger point questions take you off center for very long, that's the thing. So some of the internal practices are breath work. Some of the internal practices are meditation. Some of the internal practices are watching your mind. Where is your mind going and thinking? We all have negative thoughts, but do you stay there? So transforming your mind on a micro level to on a moment by moment basis. One thing that everyone can do, and that I think is really hard. One of the things that really struck me, I was listening to Dan Siegel talking about training people, over 50,000 people, training people on 5 minutes of silence, and how it was revelatory in feeling both love and expansiveness and connecting with all beings. And I was like, wow, so many people haven't ever slowed down and taken even 5 minutes to be quiet with themselves. So I think if there was one thing, if someone hasn't done it already, to try that. You can even try it for 1 minute, but you try for 5 minutes just to sit and breathe and watch your thoughts without, yes, criticism, I think things are going to come up, but just to sit and be with yourself for those few minutes and see what starts to calm down. And then if you can expand that to every hour, take 1 minute to breathe and let go of the worries, the thoughts, the whatever, and start to be able to see if you can get a clear mind once an hour for 1 minute and start to have command over that. Because you have command over your mind, we also need command over our bodies. So it's a twofold process. It's not just your mind. You want to put it into motion. You want to do this while you're walking or moving, because it's you might be able to do it sitting alone, and then we get out into the world and then something throws us off, right? But the practice is cumulative. And I think that is key to having that kind of calm and centeredness, so you can handle anything and you can handle anyone.
Susan, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing all of this wisdom. I really appreciate you being here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have fantastic questions, and I'm so pleased to meet your audience. So I'd love to see all of you at prsecrets.com and connect in whatever way feels right to you. Yeah.
And thank you for audience members who tuned in live or catching this on a recording. We have amazing guests like Susan joining us for this new season of This Week with Sabir. So definitely tune in and look out for new episodes throughout the year. Thank you very much.